Alright, the data is looking promising. Just a few more tests and we should be good. Hey, what's that? FDA approves Aducanumab, the first targeted therapy for Alzheimer's? Are you kidding me? Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicholas and I'm a neuroscientist, a dementia researcher at Lancaster University, and I'm also a high-performance coach, specializing on psychology, mindset change, and the neuroscience of flow. And today, I thought I'd do something completely different, because we recently had a breakthrough in dementia research, and it's not a joke. The very first drug for Alzheimer's disease to prevent memory loss was actually approved by the FDA a few weeks ago, and as a researcher myself, I'm skeptical. So in this video, I will give you some quick insight into what happens in the brain during Alzheimer's disease, and I'll share with you the truth about this, in fact not so revolutionary drug, and what my top 3 recommendations to prevent Alzheimer's are. And as a little bonus for those who are interested, I will also give you a quick live update about myself. This is now the future of my work, since we now have this drug, how I managed to become a neuroscientist in the first place, and of course, how I got into this idea to set up a high-performance in a business, coaching business. And as always, if you have a moment, please just drop me a like, subscribe if you haven't, and let's do this. Alright, so first and foremost, let me explain what happens in the brain during Alzheimer's disease. So what you can see here on the left hand side is a healthy brain cell, and on the right hand side is a brain cell during Alzheimer's disease. So as you can see, the main difference is that you have the formation of gigantic plaques outside of the brain cells, and you have the formation of so-called tau tangles. So these are another form of clump that forms inside of the brain cells. And this is due to the aging process over time. So as per the amyloid hypothesis, which is the main hypothesis of how Alzheimer's disease is established in the brain, is that a protein called amyloid beta, so the red blocks you see there, builds up over time as you age, as you get older, and eventually this protein starts to stick together. It forms those little oligomers you see there. So oligomers are just short clumps or small clumps. And these small clumps then eventually clump together to form those gigantic plaques that you also see on the right hand side there. And the plaques, they are toxic to the neurons, and eventually they cause that another protein called tau, so the blue bars you see there, inside of the brain cells also starts to stick together and clump together and form so-called tau tangles or neurofibrillary tangles. And ultimately, in combination, the gigantic plaques that form outside of the brain cells and the tangles inside of the brain cells are toxic and eventually kill the brain cells. And as you lose your brain cells, and also as the connections between your brain cells are destroyed, you see memory loss. So, of course, since we know the toxic effects of these clumps, we in our lab, for example, have already developed a peptide. So that was in 2010. There's actually our publication up there. And what our little peptide does is that it in fact binds to amyloid beta and prevents that it sticks together. So overall, it prevents that the plaques form. On the other hand, what we also do in order to make our treatment more effective is that we are currently developing and testing a second peptide, and this peptide is supposed to bind to tau inside of the brain cells. So ultimately, the goal here is to prevent that the tau tangles form. And in combination, we hope that our 2 peptides can stop Alzheimer's disease. Now, that said, one of the most interesting things I learned is that my very own supervisor, as on the picture here, David Allsop, was actually the first to isolate the plaques from the brain of Alzheimer's disease. It's actually mentioned in this little article here on Alz Forum because we also recently had some sad news, and that is that he passed away due to cancer. But nonetheless, he was actually an absolute expert in the field of Alzheimer's disease. And his discovery back then, the isolation of the plaques, in fact, led to a publication in 1991 that pretty much set the baseline for everything for the entire Alzheimer research. And that is the fact that the deposition of those plaques are, in fact, the central event of Alzheimer's disease. However, I must say that we have done an immense amount of research over the last years, and it's slowly but surely becoming clear that the plaques and the tangles are just a piece of the entire puzzle. There are many other negative things going on in the brain, for example, an overactive immune system in the brain, or in other words, chronic brain inflammation. And all of these factors, they also contribute to brain damage with aging, which then leads to memory loss and, of course, ultimately the development of Alzheimer's disease. Anyhow, that said, let's move on to the next point of the video, and that is the new treatment. Now, of course, for the first time in history now, a disease-modifying drug that can actually halt the progression of Alzheimer's disease has in fact been accepted by the medical agency, the FDA, the medical agency of the United States. And by the way, the estimated cost of the therapy will be somewhere between $30,000 to $50,000 per patient per year. Now, to go into more detail of what the drug actually does. Alright, so about Aducanumab, the new treatment, what you can see here, the red parts over there, that is the clumps, the plaques that form outside of the brain cells, and Aducanumab, the new Alzheimer treatment, is an antibody. And what this antibody does is that it specifically binds to the plaques that form in Alzheimer's disease. So the idea is that you simply inject these antibodies like you would a new vaccine for the virus, for example, the COVID virus. And what then happens is that once the antibody binds to the plaque, the immune system is alerted. So the immune system then pretty much attacks the plaques and destroys them. And this works in fact quite well. So as you can see on the right hand side here, this is how it initially looks like. So red means that there's a lot in the brain. Blue means that there's little. So red is the plaques. It means that in the beginning you have a lot of plaques here, but after the injection of the drug, 1 year later, as you can see, the red color disappeared, which means that the plaques are pretty much almost entirely gone. That is what the studies showed. Whereas in contrast, again, you have the placebo treatment here. That was just saline injected, and nothing happened, as you would expect. So the plaques just stayed in the brain. Okay, now that we have this new drug around, we got some positive messages, obviously, from the CEO of the Alzheimer's Association. Just to read a little article here to cite that. This approval is a victory for people living with Alzheimer's and the families, said Harry Jones, President and CEO of the Alzheimer's Association. So it's a new day. This approval allows people living with Alzheimer's more time to live better. And for families, it means being able to hold on to their loved ones longer. Alright, so that said, now Nick, doesn't that sound amazing? It's great, it's incredible news. Just quit your freaking PhD and retire already, we don't need you anymore. So, I mean, sure, if they keep paying me, then I will probably do that. But jokes aside, while I'm actually really happy, there are a few fundamental issues with Aducanumab, with the new treatment for Alzheimer's. And I will now give you some insight into what actually happened and why it's a problem. First and foremost, the effects of Aducanumab, the new treatment, by Biogen in fact, were investigated in 2 phase 3 clinical trials called Emerge and Engage. And by the way, in phase 3 clinical trials, Those are very large scale studies with thousands of patients. You have control patients and you have dementia patients, in which a drug has to be better than a placebo in preventing memory loss. And certainly besides memory loss, you can look at other things. We call them biomarkers, such as the plaque load in the brain or the total brain mass itself, also to check if there's any positive change there. But ultimately, what you need, the point is, if a drug doesn't have any benefits, so if the drug doesn't improve memory, then it's simply pretty useless. And well, in the case of Biogen's Aducanumab, the new Alzheimer treatment, it did what it was supposed to do. So it removed the plaques in the brain, as I showed you earlier. However, the problem is that Aducanumab only had some benefit for cognition and memory in one of the two trials, and failed to have any positive effect in the second clinical trial that was run with it. So in other words, the total conclusion looking at the data was that while the antibody or the treatment did remove the plaques in the brain, it did not improve memory. And what you need to understand here also is that correlation is not causation, by the way. Just because you have plaques in your brain doesn't mean that you have Alzheimer's. Fun fact here, likewise, haircuts are actually associated with getting cancer. Haircuts are medically classified as carcinogenic, as cancer-causing. But that doesn't mean that cutting your hair causes cancer. Alright, it could be the case that cancer causes you to lose your hair, and that's why you need to get a haircut. Alright, so correlation is not causation. And the same is true in business, by the way. So be very careful with how you interpret your data and always take it with a grain of salt. But anyhow, that aside, because Aducanumab, the new Alzheimer treatment, didn't work properly, and because it could actually not improve memory, even Biogen, so the company who produces the drug terminated all clinical trials in March 2009. They did a futility analysis, in fact, and they concluded that the drug doesn't work. So the company itself thought it doesn't work. Or did they? What ended up happening is that the management of Biogen, they pretty much cherry-picked the good parts from the data they had from both clinical trials, and they claimed that the higher doses of their drug, of Aducanumab, actually showed some good effect. So Biogen went ahead to the FDA in July 2020 to get approval, of course, for Aducanumab as a treatment for Alzheimer's. And ultimately, the FDA, of course, looked at the data and wasn't convinced. But on the other hand, there is, of course, a high need for an Alzheimer drug. There's nothing out there, obviously. So the FDA used the so-called emergency rule, and that allowed Aducanumab to be approved. Now, the problem here is there's no scientific evidence at all that Aducanumab, the new Alzheimer treatment, has any benefit for dementia patients whatsoever. Now, what do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to know. Now, that said, other researchers who looked at the data pretty much also concluded that there is no benefit whatsoever. And yeah, for you scientists out there, I will actually link you the review I show you here about the clinical trials with Aducanumab in the comments below, just to let you know. Anyhow, there are also two other big issues besides the fact that it doesn't work. So the first one is the fact that Biogen's drug is not the first plaque-removing drug. In fact, there were other approaches and several other plaque-removing antibodies, crenezumab, gantenerumab, solanezumab, and whatever else they are called, and they have all been tested in clinical trials before, and every single one of these drugs failed. And in fact, some of these drugs made the memory deficits even worse. And the second thing is that there are side effects. And what can happen is that those drugs, those antibodies, they can cause brain edema partially. That means that they can cause that excess water can build up in your brain, in your blood vessels. Now, taking all of that into consideration, now what are my top 3 recommendations as a neuroscientist myself to prevent Alzheimer's? And personally, if you know someone with Alzheimer's, or if you want to avoid getting Alzheimer's yourself, then I would recommend you to do 3 things. The first thing is to take Aducanumab. So if you were to take the drug, if you can, then you need to do it as early as possible in order to prevent the buildup of the toxic plaques. Now you see memory issues in Alzheimer's, of course, because your brain has been damaged already, because it has been shrunken over the years, because the plaques, the tangles, and all of the other things that are going on destroyed the brain cells and the brain cell connections. So again, we need to take the drug early to prevent that the damage appears in the first place. The second thing is that the drug is actually more likely to work for people with Down's syndrome, because those people get more plaque formation in their brain genetically. And it's also useful for people that have a genetic mutation that speeds up plaque formation in the brain. Now, that said, those genetic mutations, they lead to early onset Alzheimer's under the age of 60, and they are in fact very rare, so don't worry about it too much. In fact, only 1 to 5% of Alzheimer patients have such genetic mutations that accelerate plaque formation, and you can find it out with a gene test, in fact. So in that case, the drug would be a good consideration. And third, that is, do the damn basics. So eat your goddamn vegetables. Live an active lifestyle. Avoid obesity and cardiovascular diseases, especially diabetes. Diabetes is a gigantic risk factor for Alzheimer's, so avoid that. Socialize, stay mentally active, because the brain is a muscle. Use it or lose it, etc. In all of these things, so having a good lifestyle in general, staying physically active, staying mentally active, will of course protect you against Alzheimer's disease. And in addition, obviously, as a high performance coach, you also have to point out that the better your lifestyle, the better your brain health and performance, cognitive and physical in general. Body and mind are connected. So do your part. All right, and lastly, as promised, a little update about myself. And to begin with, how did I even get into dementia research? And that was because of my grandmother. So simply put, at one point in my life, that was when I was around 12 years old, in fact, she started to act kind of, let's say, weird. So in the beginning, it was just simple things. For example, my own dad, he started he started to dread going shopping with my grandmother, because the issue is that she would just get lost in the supermarket and need forever, so hours. And other things were that she got into the really peculiar habit to peek through the fence in our garden to check on what we're doing. So weird stuff like that. And at some point, she would only eat crackers with ketchup. Yum. So ultimately, besides the smaller things, of course, the memory issues kicked in. And at some point, she wasn't even able to recognize us anymore. And that actually scared me. And it just made me think, what happens to you when you forget everything? When you don't recognize your friends and your family and your loved ones anymore? And when in the end, you even forget who you are yourself? And well, the thing is, the brain, it decides everything. It decides how we consciously perceive the world. And on the other hand, the subconscious beliefs that are formed in our brain, that pretty much determine whether we have a great or a poor life. And also for more insight, if you're interested, of course, I'll link a video about how perception works in the brain, also about how subconscious beliefs are formed, In a second video, this is about the link between our subconscious mind as well as high performance and grit in the description. So definitely check those out if you haven't. Now that aside, what are my dreams? What are my goals? And they are, I think, very simple. What I personally want to do is to push dementia research to do my personal part, again, to bring more effective treatment or to bring a cure for Alzheimer's into the clinic, to get one step closer to that. Of course, we already have a treatment, but there's always a way to do it better, right? And there's still no real evidence that it works, so we need to stay on our toes as researchers. On the other hand, other mental disorders are on the rise. For example, depression or anxiety disorders, such as PTSD. And in fact, I had a severe case of depression myself in the past. And what you find is that in most cases, all of these mental disorders, they have something in common. And that's the fact that there's a strong feeling of emptiness and a lack of purpose. And well, that's why I have decided to become a high performance coach as well. And that is pretty much to help you guys to find meaning and purpose in your life, to master your mind, and to give you the high performance tools that you need to accomplish your biggest dreams. Now, of course, besides psychology and my personal experience in doing this 180 turn to get from depression to fulfilled, I also recently got into the neuroscience of flow. Now, flow, it's a state of absolute peak performance, of deep immersion, and the state of the highest pleasure possible. And I've recently learned flow is in fact mandatory for true happiness in life. I actually made a video about the truth of happiness as well. So if you want to know what actually makes you happy in life, again, link in the description. Check it out if you're interested. Anyhow, that said, what are my future plans? So I'm busy. I got 4 publications to write, in fact. I got a lot more lab work to do for my PhD studies to look into our second drug that treats the tau tangles. I have powerlifting goals in the gym, so I need to hit some strength goals there. I got a guitar back there that should in fact be played. And I'm also developing a high performance course for you guys to set yourself up to success, so stay tuned for that. And generally what I think is that just continuous self-improvement in all areas of life and every single day is key. Again, there's always a way to do it better and to be more efficient at what you're doing. And that's even why I recently paid myself to get peak performance training, also to get a better coach for you guys. So stay tuned for more brain insight, more high performance psychology, more time mastery and productivity tips, as well as, of course, more flow science in the future. It will all be coming. And that'll brings us to the end. And if you enjoyed the video, please just let me know by giving it a like, drop down a comment because it was of course something else today. And of course, please, if you haven't, subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more and stay up to date for more. And don't forget to crush the week, guys. Stay healthy, protect the brain. Anyhow, see you in the next video.